June 1944, Normandy, France. A column of British tanks makes its way down the dusty road. Troops, hitching a ride on the tanks, talk about how the Germans are surely on the back foot and that they'll reach Paris in a few weeks. The lead tank explodes. Men scramble for cover as the entire convoy grinds to a halt. A tank commander looks around through his binoculars for the enemy. Another tank is hit and bursts into flames. The smoke clears. A Tiger tank emerges. These British tanks will barely scratch the Tiger's thick hide from afar. Back in England, a new vehicle was being tested at the Chobham Proving Ground. A41 heavy cruiser tank, this soon-to-be marvel of modern engineering, would go on to influence generations of Western tanks and become the first main battle tank ever produced, the Centurion. The A41 Centurion was a quantum leap forward in British tank design. But why had it taken so long for Britain to get a truly effective tank? Before the outbreak of the Second World War, the British Army was equipped with two types of tanks and doctrines for their use. The infantry tank, adhering to the World War I style of trench warfare, would be slow enough to allow infantry to keep pace and be heavily armored as they advanced ahead to create a breakthrough. The cruiser tank was faster but sacrificed armor protection as a result, and fulfilled a similar role to horse cavalry of flanking enemy positions or exploiting a breakthrough. But combat experience in France and North Africa demonstrated their flaws. The infantry tanks could not properly support the infantry even against soft targets, and their armor protection, deemed sufficient in their inception, would be easily outmatched by later German anti-tank guns such as the infamous Pak 88mm. The cruiser tanks were far too vulnerable and similarly lacked firepower against increasingly tougher panzers. Many were also mechanically unreliable. By 1943, Britain was bolstering its numbers with American M4 Shermans, which had a decent balance of armor protection, mobility, reliability, and a dual-purpose 75mm gun. On October 1943, Britain's War Office tasked Sir Claude Gibb to design and produce their next heavy cruiser tank under the designation A41. For this new tank, they would throw out the rulebook and start from scratch. One of the first rules they discarded was that the tank be transportable by rail. This requirement had held back previous tank designs, which needed to meet the carry limits of existing rail transport. The War Office would eventually develop a transport truck, the Antar, that could carry the new tank, and the new tank should be able to go to where it needed to be under its own power. Unlike the cramped Firefly and the rather conspicuous Challenger turrets that just managed to fit the powerful 17-pounder gun, the Centurion had a wider turret ring. While 5 inches may not seem much between the Sherman and Centurion, it did make a difference in being able to fit the full 17-pounder gun and the 3 crew members in the turret comfortably. To be able to withstand a direct hit from a German 8.8cm gun, its front hull plates were 76mm thick. Not as thick as a Churchill infantry tank that had up to 101 to 152mm of vertical front plate, but the sloped front of the Centurion actually increased the effective protection more than equal to the Churchill, without adding as much weight, similar to the design of the Panther and T-34. Instead of a Christie suspension like on the Cromwell and Comet cruiser tanks, the Centurion had a Horseman suspension which was easier to maintain and didn't take up as much space inside the hull. The new tank was powered by a Rolls-Royce Meteor engine that was also used in the Cromwell and Comet tanks, which was based off of the Merlin aircraft engine that propelled the P-51 Mustang. The new tank ended up weighing 42.5 tons, just a bit over the weight limit than expected. This exceeded the heaviest British tank so far, the Churchill Mark 7, but was just shy of the German Panther. But the War Office gave their seal of approval. Production commenced in the early 1945, with further upgrades and improvements added later on. The earliest Mark I pilot vehicles had a 20mm Posen cannon in its own ball mount alongside the 17-pounder main gun. The Mark II had a newly designed fully cast turret with thicker armor. The Mark III was the next major variant, fitted with a new 20-pounder gun, and the 20mm was dropped completely for a coaxial Beza machine gun, as well as a fully automatic stabilization system for the main gun. This would become the de facto British production Centurion tank. The Mark IV was an abandoned close support version. The Mark V replaced the Beza machine gun with a 30 caliber Browning, and the Mark V/1 further increased the armor while adding a 50 caliber Browning for ranging the 20-pounder gun. In 1959, the Mark V/2 received its biggest upgrade, the 105mm L7 gun, and later variants of the Centurion would be armed with this gun that became the staple of Western main battle tanks, including the American M60 and M1 Abrams and German Leopard. By the time production of the Centurion ended in 1962, there had been 13 basic marks and numerous variants and upgrades. This concludes part 1 of this series. For part 2, we will be diving into the post-World War II conflicts the Centurions were involved in, its impact and legacy.